Welcome to DMs Discuss.
Hey, I'm Mike.
I'm Chris.
I'm Scott.
Welcome to DMs Discuss, where today DMs are going to discuss continuing the campaign. Last time we walked you through what your first session would look like. This is essentially going to be a rundown of what you need for everything else going forward. So continuity and plot threads and holes, prepping your quests, item economy, what you do with your downtime, and how you adapt to changes, because shit is for sure going to go off the rails.
And I think with your second session, logical place to start. Like obviously you're going to be doing prep work and things like that similar to your first session. You might have a few things in the bag, but once you actually sit down and actually get to the table with your players, a good place to start session 2 is a recap of what happened in the first session. You can do them. You can let your players do them, or you can kind of recap a bit and let your players kind of chip in with things they remember from the first session.
I think that's a really good point, Scott. Players chipping in is a lot of how I remember what happened in sessions sometimes. Like I take my own notes and try to have stuff prepped as much as possible, but there's always like little things that might not stand out to you as a DM that might stand out to players. So having them chip in is a really good idea.
Yeah, especially I find I always take, the story notes and stuff like that, but maybe I didn't write down that, Zolg happened to be the one who led the killing strike, and it was a glorious moment for everybody. I'm just like, right, check mark, this guy's dead.
Yeah, I think I'm the opposite a lot of times, where I'll take my notes are usually like cool player things that happen, and main story stuff. I'm like, they're about here in the main story. I know where they are, where they're going to be, and like major things I note down, but like small story stuff is usually just I remember where they are.
Yeah, and if you run a lot of one shots and don't run a campaign, you don't need to do recaps. So there's one of the benefits of not of running multiple one shots.
Yeah, exactly. One shots are the king for like lazy DMing. If you don't want to have to keep track of anything, and you just want to run some fun stories for players every once in a while, one shots are definitely the way to go.
I will say a lot of my one shots are pure homebrew, so I do sit down and do a bit of writing. So maybe not that lazy. Give me a little
Yeah,
credit.
for sure. But getting into the first thing we want to talk about, were continuity, plot threads, and holes. It doesn't matter if you have plot holes in a
No,
one shot because you're
they're
wrapping
all
everything up at the end.
yeah, they're all
gone.
over the place. Yeah.
They're tied up at the end. You don't have to worry about like, oh, but in session 2 you said this like 4 fucking years later.
I should every one shot I run, I should note the plot holes and threads, and just and like 3 years later, just run a one shot where someone's trying to clean up all the holes I left.
And you see, this explains how Roach wouldn't have known his father was even in the lab and not have seen the soul.
Oh, I love it.
For see, he lost his memory on escaping.
Oh, that was a fun. Oh man, that's gonna be one of my DM moments. Goddamn Roach. Yeah, I mean, I don't have to deal with plot threads and holes generally. If I run like a 2 or 3 episode one, there's kind of a single thread I'm following there. It's generally one kind of railroady story. I mean, it's a one shot. There is a beginning, middle, end. But how do you guys deal with plot threads and holes in like a more long running campaign?
Well, I find I usually have two ways. Is one of them is, with my notes stuff, I try to keep track of them before they happen. And the other way is to just aggressively gaslight my players into thinking that they don't actually exist.
Yeah, it happens all the time.
I'm like, no, you thought this happened, but really this happened. Your notes are wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's okay, right? Because as a DM, you are technically allowed to change your PC's memories, right? So
yeah. Also, I should say that there's another way around it where instead of admitting that I'm wrong, I just change the story to fit the plot hole. I'm like, you think that's a hole, but a hole is just something that can be filled in.
Or you can use it like if you want to introduce a new storyline. You'd be like, yeah, you guys didn't pick up on this at all. Like I've been dropping clues for a long time. Like this has definitely been a thing that you should have noticed because
this is like
session 5 I did this. Like this is the bartender.
It's like that one meme that's going around for a while with like the disappearing mountain. Whereas this guy telling a story about how, he sent his players back in time and he added a mountain into the description of like the scenery around a town. and the player's like, "Oh man, I can't wait to find out what happens to the mountain."
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love
Yeah.
that.
I think like, there's gonna be holes. Like let's be honest, we're not professional writers and we're not like focused on continuity. If there's little holes in your story, like I think that's perfectly okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Um, obviously you want your story to make sense. Um, like the super big evil bad guy shouldn't all of a sudden turn around and start being kind to people. That makes absolutely no sense. But in terms of little holes in continuity, I think for the most part, players aren't gonna really notice small small issues there. So
Yeah, I think too, like the biggest thing, when in terms comes to like specifically continuity, uh, is kind of making sure that the rules of the game kind of stay the same in the sense that like if like maybe you have a recurring villain, if you especially if maybe it's a homebrew one and you gave him like resistance to like he's immune to fire damage in the first fight, but then he's immune to acid damage the second fight because you forgot about it. Like that's the kind of stuff you want to watch out for because people will take issue with that. It's like, man, like we had this whole like acid based attack is immune to fire. Now you've completely changed this for no reason.
Yeah, just trying to be as consistent as possible with like things that have been introduced. So not even that's not even like a plot thread or whole thing, but that's just a like consistency in the things that people are fighting against, because people will base their strategy in combat around the resistances or the ways that people are able to avoid their damage. So changing that up on the fly, or like just because you forgot between sessions, can be really detrimental to your players if they are prepping based on what they've experienced before, right?
yeah, I mean, I guess that goes to like if you have someone that's or a boss that's or an NPC that's pivotal, have a stat block for them, have a character sheet for them. If it's these little wolves or something, I think as a DM you can swing why these wolves are not resistant or vulnerable to fire, but then these wolves are not. Maybe they're a different breed of wolf. Maybe their fur has, you know, kind of fiery spikes, and you can kind of explain that away. But when it comes to bigger things like your, BBG, big bad evil guy, or your, kind of pivotal NPCs or characters, you do want those to kind of behave the same and feel the same. That's not to say they can't change. There might be a reason why this guy has now acquired lightning resistance.
Yeah,
Like maybe you encounter your BBEG for the first time and you blew him up with 3 fireballs, and then he comes back and he's wearing a ring of fire resistance because fucking of course he is.
Yeah, and I mean that's
Yeah.
totally fine, right? That's a DM decision there, and that has nothing to do with continuity. You can, I think, as long as you can have a logical reasoning as to if your players ask you to justify why does this guy have fire resistance now. Oh, you look at his hand and you see a ring with a bright red opal in it.
Mhm.
All right, cool. So I think players would be satisfied with that. Yeah, this guy did pick up a ring of fire resistance. All right. I think in terms of plot threads and holes and like in your first session you're dropping kind of these threads and you're giving PCs player characters threads to follow. And it may be like one main quest. You might have given them multiple depending on the game you're running. If you're running a more open world sandboxy kind of game, you may have been giving them multiple hooks and multiple things they can follow. So how do you guys go about like taking those threads that you've dropped in the first game and then like prepping different quests surrounding those?
well, I think there's different ways because I tend to drop kind of like there's the main plot thread where it's kind of like always like the one big next thing you're trying to do that's usually fairly obvious and kind of like side things. So in terms of like the main one, I try to always make sure that at some point there's like a very obvious like this is the next step. Like oh, like maybe like about the big bad evil guy, but not where he is. It's like, but we gotta go get this thing from the crypt to allow us to find his base, and that's one thing. But then maybe like there's like some like powerful item that could be useful, and like maybe you just heard some whispers about it in a tavern. People like maybe meet a priest. He's like, oh yeah, like my church had this legendary relic that's been long lost, and he just genuinely doesn't know anything else about it. But that's a way to leave like potentially an item later where in another town someone knows more and you find it. You're like, oh yeah, that guy in the first town, he'd heard of it. This is the thing. This is the thing.
Yeah, and
Yeah, for sure.
I think quests can generally be divided into sort of main quests and side quests, like you said, right? Like there could be one main quest or several main quests, maybe 2 or 3. It kind of depends on what you're running, but a lot of times you see that in video games as well, where there's, a single main quest line. Then there are optional side quests, which like, hey, if you want to do these things, you can. But then there's side quests off the main quest line where it's like, this is going to give you a big advantage, or this is something you do want to do, or this is something that's going to give you more information in order to progress the main quest, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think when I'm kind of putting stuff together and I give people side quests, a lot of the times the side quests are so players get a little bit more like even experience playing their characters before they have to take anything on that is too crazy or too powerful for them. They get used to playing their characters uh in a campaign. And also I tend to try to give at least some information or some advantage on the main quest line from the resolution of secondary quests and secondary quest lines, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's also speaking of the way you DM. In Curse of Strahd, I think it has a really good way to drop some threads with the Taroko reading at the start of it, where it kind of like gives you those like cards that give you like a hint on like where stuff is, and like not only does it tell you where to find it, it tells you that it exists to make sure that you don't think that Curse Strahd is like Strahd lives over there. Let's go kick open his door and see what's going on. It's like, hey, no, like sit down. Here's like some fortune cards to
Yeah.
tell you where the stuff that helps you learn about and kill Strahd. Maybe take a little look see around here before you go knocking on that door.
And I mean, those are akin to like, like the threads of destiny, the plot threads of destiny. Like this is the prophecy, and these are some of the things that have been prophesized about. I think I know in Strahd there is that, as Chris was saying, the tarot card reading, and that's given to you by a seer. And that's actually what randomizes Curse of Strahd, is those tarot cards kind of switch things up a bit on you. But yeah, like having someone, if you're going for this grand fantasy adventure, having a prophecy or something like that can be a pretty quick way to introduce 3 or 4 plot thread side quests, right?
Oh, absolutely. Like I'm most certainly using like a Madame Eva style character in any homebrew I do from now on. Just so I can use, like, I'm gonna give my own meaning and own locations and my own worlds to the Taroko cards. But like I actually enjoyed as a DM with that. A lot of people will pre-choose the cards so that they can write the script and like they can know where players are going to go and when and like. But for me, I decided to do the Taroko reading live in that session so that I would be surprised about where stuff was too, and that it left it open for the players to go wherever they wanted to go in that world, right? So I feel like adding that randomness to it can make it fun for you as a DM too, because then
Yeah.
you're like, oh, now I need to scale this area because they're going to go there first for sure, and they're going to be like level 3.
Yeah, not just that, but just the fact that they're tactile. Like the fact that you
Mhm.
turned your camera on and you're flipping cards in front of us,
Mhm.
and there's that anticipation of like, oh, what's the next card going to be? So when we talk about DM materials and drawing maps and, making terrain and things like that, um, something like that, like, tarot cards, that can be fun, right? And this can be something where if you're a more creative DM and you enjoy art and things, maybe, creating your own little cards, grab some stock paper and do some art. And, it doesn't have to be big, maybe an 8-card deck and you're flipping 3 of those, but it can really add something for the players, and it's fun, right? People like seeing things like that.
Yeah, I mean, you don't even have to make something that's specific for D&D, right? Like you can legitimately just use a tarot deck and assign meanings to those cards. Just have a little index of what each card that you're going to draw from the tarot deck might refer to, right? Because that's the other cool thing about the Taroko deck in the Curse of Strahd thing is depending on what location the card goes in, the meaning is different.
Yeah, and even like even not just that, as a, you say that's fun as a DM, but that can be fun for your players too. If you are playing in person, shuffle the tarot card deck or shuffle a deck of playing cards, and spread them out in front of your players and say pick 4 cards, or you have 4 players, each of you pick a card, and then they feel that they've had some impact on your universe through their random card choice, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so when it comes to quests, I mean, like there is that main quest line, and a lot of times, I think as a new DM, having that main quest and having this build up to what is the final goal for the party. The final goal for the party may be killing the fly that's been in your apartment for 2 days, and you just have not been able to catch the damn thing, annoying the hell out of me. But your final goal could be the restoration of a long lost city. It could be killing an evil. It could be preventing an evil. It could be in a politically based campaign, infiltrating other continents and conquest, right? Depending on what your campaign is. And you hear the term railroading a lot. Like, main quests can be pretty linear. There's a beginning, middle, and end. And you hear talk about player agency and DMs kind of forcing you in one direction. And I mean, you can nudge your players towards the main quest line, and in some cases you want to do that, because I know, for example, with Chris's campaign, there's some urgency on that main quest line. The longer you're taking, the more they're bolstering their forces. So, um, like, when I think about main quest line, I think about that like a tree, right? You want to kind of get to the top of the tree, but there's all these branches on the way that you can kind of visit and loop back on, and that's really fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Going back to what you said about like having main quests have a sense of urgency, I feel like that's always kind of the key thing, because even if your players don't know, they might not even know what like the main objective of the main quest is. Like, it could be like, they got some kind of a lead, like, maybe in this case of Fandelver, Gundren Rockseeker just needs their help with something, and the kind of like the finish line keeps on getting pushed back, where it's one of those ones where, like, well, all we got to do is this, and then once you get there you find another problem, it's it's this. And so it kind of like, it's still linear in the sense of that, it's still one story, but it doesn't seem as much where it's, an evolving situation, instead of being like, you're starting here, eventually you're going to kill this one big bad guy, uh, you'll get there eventually.
Yeah, and I think in terms of, I would say, like, when people talk about railroading, they're talking about a railroad, right? They're talking about, you're on a train and you're gonna go to stop A, and then stop B, and then stop C, and then stop D. And a lot of times for players, that can feel like their agency is being taken away and things like that. So when you're writing these quests, you can have that railroad in your mind, but just think about offshoots of that railroad and other trains that they might want to take. And in some cases, maybe choosing to do a side quest and kind of chill and explore crafting for a few sessions, that can have consequences, and they can be good or bad. Maybe you had planned for an ambush in the next city, and because they chose to not go to that city, maybe that ambush doesn't happen anymore. You can kind of hint to your players, like, you did hear word about some people that were looking for you, but after a few days they got fed up and assumed you weren't coming and left. So, it doesn't always have to be bad. I don't think you have to always make that urgency a bad thing. In some cases, it could work in good ways for the party, right?
Yeah, or you can do what Chris does, and every day you spend somewhere, he just like pulls out a jar and puts some gems in it. Doesn't tell you what the hell it is,
They're just gems,
but you
Mike.
know that it's bad. They're not just gems, Scott. They're never just gems.
At the end of this, you guys are going to have a session where you all make necklaces, and that will be your new magical item. They do require attunement, though, so start thinking about what item you want to toss.
I mean, also you could add real consequences for your quests and stuff by making so if your players don't actually do what they're supposed to, the entire town gets wiped off the map because they went in and killed one guy, and throughout the quest is to get rid of all of the cult.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And then Chris makes you listen to 23 eulogies.
yeah, or if you're really extreme DM, like, if they do get captured, roll a dice and cut off someone's finger, right? Like, you get, I mean, it's totally your game, and if your players agree to that, I think that's legal, right?
Mhm.
So that's kind of main quest, and you do want to have that idea in mind, and you do want to you can nudge your players towards it and give them that sense of urgency. When it comes to side quests, for me, side quests are really fun because I think this is where you can get really creative. Side quests don't have to be, go kill these 5 people or go raid this bandit camp, and they can be. That's perfectly fine. But as I talked about in a previous episode, side quests could be, hey, this guy lost his 3 prize chickens, and you got to go find them, and that can lead to some really fun situations for players. And sometimes you don't have developments in the main quest line. Maybe, there's a bit of a lull in that and things are quiet. And that gives you an opportunity to do stuff like, you know, gathering quests, or, finding the chickens, or, actually raiding raiding bandit camps where this has nothing to do with your main quest line, but you might find some cool stuff.
Yeah, I find side quests are a really good time for character development. When you're not faced with the urgency of the main quest and you're doing something fun is when a lot of like the jokey like camaraderie between players can happen. And I found that like a lot of the fun relationships between characters have developed in games that I've DM'd during that like side quest time when they're like, yeah, we're gonna do this thing. It's probably not a big threat to us, but we're gonna do it. It's gonna earn us some acclaim. We're gonna get some gold for it, and we're gonna have some fun along the way. And I feel like side quests are like a good tension breaker. If you've had like a couple of really close calls in your main quest line, it's a really good time to like the enemy forces are going to be regrouping because you've obviously come out on top because you're all still alive. So like you can take that time to do some side quests and get your players back in a mindset where they're willing to take on crazy things again. And yeah, a lot of fun player development can happen and player relationship development can happen in those times.
Yeah, and if you do have a heavy session, and a character does die, a side quest can be a good opportunity to introduce that person's new character and things like that. I think when we talk about quests, like there's generally main quest and side quest. And I think there's one more, but I feel like it kind of falls under side quest. Or I mean, you could treat it as a main quest line, really, which is character specific quests. All your PCs have written backgrounds or have something in their background that you can literally use to create a quest that has this big attachment to this player. So, for example, with Blackstrike Vanguard, Aegis was a member as a child. He was a member of a group called the Protectors, which was this. They were at a Skyrift and they would stop the evils from coming through. And he went to adventure to learn more about the world and to prepare himself for any more subsequent attacks. So, if Chris ever threw a quest in there related to the Protectors, I would like instantly perk up, right? Because that's part of my backstory and something that I wrote and something that I'm interested in. And I think that's where you can really engage a player and the party that wants to help this player do something that's important to them.
Yeah, well, I think going what you're saying about that, Scott, is that's what I like about the Vanguard system that I use in my games, where it's a guild and there's like promotion levels, and I wrote in a system to allow me to do player quests at like a known stage, which is when you get to be a commander, you do a special quest where like the game pauses, you do something, you get a cool weapon. It's always based around like who your character is, like try to throw in some stuff, to kind of work with that, add in some neat things. And for me, it's nice because then the players kind of know like that's when they get their quest, they get their cool item. That's like their big moment where like, yeah, this one's going to be all about you. Probably going to do some badass stuff in there. Maybe it'll be like Mike and completely fail at his.
Or you just die. Yeah, or you just die like me. The party bails you out.
But yeah, I always had the idea of making that system for the idea that, it would create like a known time for me, like when their character quest is going to be. Because like, oh, perfect. Now there's like a counter when it reaches the top. We get to do like this fun little character excursion. I can actually like prep for that ahead of time and do some thinking about, what they started as, where they're going, and really take the time to do a good quest.
So when you're doing that, like how many sessions do you generally make this player specific quest?
That's a tricky one because normally when I first started it, it was like the whole weekend long kind of thing. So I was working with like 30 hours of game time. So it would be, a good quarter to a third of the session would be that. My plan was for, the when I was doing it, the lower level Blackstrike, that was, just evening sessions. I would plan it to be a whole session for a character quest.
Yeah, and I think you want to be careful about making this character specific quest 4 sessions long. 'Cause I think other players might disengage at that point.
Well, yeah, they're always meant to essentially I'd write a one shot for the character that would kind of branch off the main storyline was what I was always aiming for.
Yeah, Mike, how do you fold in like character backstory and character specific stuff?
So I take a little bit of a different approach, obviously, because like with the most recent game that I've been doing, it's like a linear storyline almost. So I try to fold in character based things from different characters' backgrounds to the main storyline and add threads to the existing main storylines. But it is also fun to kind of write small side quests to add on to those things, and to add side quests that like introduce things that reaffirm stuff from characters' backstories.
Side quests and character quests can also act as a filler. One of your players is getting married and he can't make a certain game, or one of your players is moving houses and can't make a certain game, but you have 3 players at the table, or even 2. Chris has run a side quest for me and, well, I think his name was
It was
Bo.
me.
No, I did one with
Yeah, there's one with Bo. You guys did the buddy cop.
yeah, we did a little buddy cop adventure. We went to the church and they wanted us to recover something, and I actually got. And you don't have to treat a side quest as like, oh, this is a 5 gold reward. I got a staff of power from that quest, I believe.
Mhm.
Like, it was a 5-hour session, and it was a sweet buddy cop, and we put our shades on, and I got a staff of power. So don't look at don't look at side quests as like minuscule things, or they have to have very low rewards. Like, if you have 2 players there and everyone else was busy, reward those players.
Yeah, it could be super pivotal moments for those players.
Yeah, honestly, having like low players and just doing like some side quest stuff can honestly be some of the most like fun and rewarding like character work and gameplay stuff, because it gives like there's so much more like stage time for the players. If it's just like like a 2-player mission or something like that, where they can really you really chew on like the quest they've been given.
Yeah, that's fun. I really enjoyed that one. That was a super fun little session there.
Yeah, and that also goes back to the adding to character bonding stuff, where those 2 characters are the only ones that experience that, so that creates like another thread to the relationship between those 2 characters. Like, oh fuck, remember the time we did this? Like, just the 2 of us, we went and took down this town.
Yeah, and that particular person was too busy later, so he didn't come to Toronto D&D much anymore. But I still remember us fishing out a huge fish from a lake, gutting it, and it had a headband of like fighting. It basically, he was a monk, so this was a red headband that added to your unarmed attacks, and I think you could Hadouken with it. Like, it was
Yeah,
I don't
I
remember.
remember that one. That was such a good item.
It was basically a Ryu's headband from Street Fighter. But
Yeah,
yeah.
it's a headband of like of road combat, and it was like every time you landed a hit, it would gain a charge, and at like a certain amount of charges, you could like launch a chromatic orb that was fire.
Yeah, so it's basically like combo Hadouken. Yeah, that was good. See, I mean that was a side quest with 2 people, and that moment, I mean, that was fun, right? Headband of road combat.
Oh, I
Good lord,
forgot
that's
about that
fantastic.
item. I haven't had a chance to use it because no one's played a monk since then.
That was a fun one. Yeah, and I mean, like, we talk about like character bonding and stuff, and as you continue the session, your characters will bond or unbond, or repel each other. There might be friction. There might be certain characters that seem to get along together and get along well in character. And you'll kind of see that, and side quests are a good way to do that. But another good way to do that in between sessions and things like that is if all of your players are on Discord during session downtime or in between sessions, make them an RP channel. And I know in Black Strike, I think ours was called the Blue Water Inn, and your players can have a chat there and talk to each other in character, and that can be really fun. And it also does stuff like smooths out your session, where like a character is not trading items in the middle of a game or something like that. Your characters can kind of talk and figure things out, kind of out of game, but still in character. That's always fun.
Yeah, I think that's always a really good idea of like how to deal with downtime. Is like there's the between the sessions and also in session. And what you're saying is like having the channel to talk about it is really interesting, because not only does it allow for players to do things, it kind of adds like things that they might not have time for in a session, stuff that they thought of in between sessions that they wanted to like do. Because sometimes like maybe you're in like a really high stakes uh situation, like maybe like you're like taking a short rest in the middle of like a big dungeon, a critical combat, and maybe there's some character stuff you want to do, but also you're really excited to kind of just like get the rest in and get back at it, because like, oh, maybe we can get to like this big pivotal fight. And having a channel to like kind of like outside the session, like talk about this stuff, is a really good way to like, anyways, this is something I would have talked about with this character during that time, but it would have been the 2 of us and would have taken up some time and like this really like a high pace scene.
Yeah, for sure. And I know Mike, like in the Black Strike stuff, like he'd pop into that RP channel on occasion, and we've had some fun chats there.
Yeah, for sure. That just goes back again to being able to bond kind of outside the normal game time and not dominate game time with that. Some tables are okay with lots of RP and stuff during sessions, and sometimes, like I said, there are just like high stakes moments where you're like, "Can we get a rest in? We got a rest in. All right, let's go again." And you don't want to take that time in session when everybody is all high energy to kind of dominate that with character RP stuff. So I really enjoy the idea of having that RP channel, and I like obviously when we started doing Strahd, I recreated the idea that Chris had for having that tavern chat to do the same thing and allow players to just talk between sessions, because I think it helps build those things so you're not just 3 hours a week together. Like there's always the ability for you to do stuff in character.
Yeah, and I think as a DM, when you start playing with more experienced players, you don't need to police that as much. Let them do whatever they want, really. And your players aren't going to do anything really crazy without asking you as a DM. A new player might try doing something a little crazy in that channel, like I'm going to steal all the gems from this person while they're asleep. And, without rolls and stuff, like they're just going to be like, okay, I succeed. And if the other player is okay with that and just RPs back that like, oh, I continue sleeping, then let that happen. But if the other player is not okay with that, that's something where you might have to police that a little bit. But I know in terms of our channel, for example, let's say let's say we're like getting a rest and I wanted to cast a spell on somebody. Like, there's spells that last 8 hours and they're ritual spells. So I might in the RP channel say that, I cast commune and then ping Mike and just say like, I cast commune and I ask these 3 questions before we go on. And that might be the start of the next session where I can start with those answers. So sometimes, sometimes as a DM, that channel's pretty hands off as a DM, let your players RP, but sometimes you will be involved with, making a decision for them. And that can
Yeah,
be
for sure.
fun too. It kind of scratches the D&D itch between the, you know, time between sessions.
Or
Yeah,
having
for
to
sure.
be an NPC at certain times. So I've been pulled into Black Strike to like play various other characters that people have asked for.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, let's put in the hat and be like, Chris, as this commander.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I mean there is the difference in downtime. Like some people allow this kind of like Discord downtime between sessions, and then there's obviously like how do you handle downtime in session? Like I know in some worlds it's high stakes and like everything is time dependent and you can't really have that kind of downtime. But there are some cases where you can have like days or weeks where you can ask your players what they would do with that time, because like the other teams regrouping, people have wounds they need to coalesce, and you have a week in game before you need to set back out again. Like, what are you doing with that time?
Yeah. But I'd go and say there's always downtime. There might not be a week of downtime, but there, like realistically, I don't care how urgent this big bad evil guy is. Your players are, I'm going to say, quote unquote, human, but they're not gods, right? Like they do need an hour to rest, and there will be points where they're traveling too. So some of that RP during travel in, while they're traveling to another city, using that RP channel to do some character RP is super fun too. But yeah, when it comes to downtime activities in game with prolonged activities, there are things like shopping, crafting, like item acquisition, things like that. So I
Skill
think that's
learning and
kind of fun.
stuff like that. I know,
Yeah,
like there are a lot of rules around that in D&D where you can essentially take time to learn a proficiency, or you can learn a feat in some rules you can adapt. But like it takes weeks to months of training to do that. And I know that there's some games I've played in that kind of give you, here and there you get like full on days off, and it's like, well, like you need X amount of days, and you can gain a new proficiency in whatever you want. So there's a time, like I know in one of our friends' games, he gave us, we'd often get handfuls of days here and there, and I was trying to learn a proficiency in intimidation. So it's like, yeah, I'm going to practice being mean in the mirror, like make scary faces at it, and like, going to write this off as like, this is like one day spent towards like the 90 I need to gain proficiency.
I used to play D&D in a Discord server, and this Discord server was basically an open world, and DMs would post games, and it was similar to Adventures League. You could bring your character to any of these games, and DMs would sign off on your adventure in the DM logs channel, and they'd give you a certain amount of XP and list your items you got, etc. It's really fun. And they had their own crafting system. Now, you don't need to, as a DM, write your own crafting system. There are things like DM's Guild, which has things like brewing poisons and crafting items, and even like in Xanathar's and Tasha's, I believe there are crafting rules. So you don't necessarily need to write your own crafting system, but be aware that you can. You can give your players, okay, the way this server did it was for every quest you did, depending on if it was a small, medium, or large quest, you would earn 3 to 5 downtime days. And then they had a downtime days menu, which is like crafting a potion, 1 downtime day, 100 gold, right? And depending on, like, they had all the different potions, right? And crafting this item, X number of downtime days and certain amount of gold. So they had this whole system derived around downtime days. So if that's something you want to do, you can basically give your players downtime days as a currency and have a menu where they can do things like learn a proficiency, unlearn a skill, learn a feat, etc.
Yeah, I think it's really good because it's all a lot of stuff that does exist, and it's something to consider when you're choosing your campaign slash creating a homebrew one. Is if you want to have that kind of like long form downtime style of gameplay, because I know some of them are pretty, you just kind of have at her, like Curse of Strahd kind of just keeps going all the time because Strahd will just keep on coming back. But Horde of the Dragon Queen has like some decent amounts of like you got to sit around for a while, where I was able to get like probably like within the course of it like almost like a month and a half of downtime. Uh, and so like you can decide if you want that. Like, do you want to have just kind of like a really narrative-driven thing, or do you want to kind of like make it like kind of the medieval time scale of like, yeah, like you gotta wait like several weeks like for everyone to recover, move around troops and stuff like that. And you have this time, like, yeah, make yourself a better sword, find yourself a belt of giant strength. Because there's so many different systems, tables. Like there's even I can't remember if it's in. I'm pretty sure it's in the Dungeon Master's Guide, where it's even one for like if you want to get a specific magic item, it's like how much gold it takes to track it down, find it, and acquire it,
Yeah,
which
I've
is
seen
a
those
kind of a
tables.
fun idea. With that could be a side quest too, even.
It adds to realism. Like, if you are this traveler and adventurer in this time, and you heard about a bag of holding, and you want to acquire one, there should be a way to do that, right?
Yeah,
Depending
exactly.
on the setting, right? Like it depends on whether or
Sure.
not you're in a high magic world or a low magic world, or like what kind of setting you've given yourself. But yeah, I mean, if you know these items are there and you know what the availability of them is, having some method of procurement for them is definitely something
Yeah.
you should look into.
So even based on the setting, like you said, okay, you're in a low magic world. So, okay, maybe the bag isn't available, or maybe it's available, but it's going to cost you a shit ton of gold. Not the I know artificers at level 10 or whatever can craft stuff for a quarter of the time and half the cost. So crafting a bag of holding would be pretty simple, right? Now, when we were playing in our campaign, what Mike did was basically tie these magical items to crafting materials. So, okay, you want a bag of holding, you're going to need a skin from a shifter. And unless you encounter a shifter, you're not going to be able to craft that item. So you can kind of gate your players that way. But that procurement system, like, it doesn't just have to be magic, right? Like, having a procurement system in general, what if I'm in a low magic setting, but I wanted silver because of silvering weapons? Maybe I have to, send some scouts out to find mines, or maybe I have to go talk to a dwarven guild to get that. Could be a quest, could be something where you do that like asynchronously, like, hey, send this guy out and your job, I'm going to pay you, go get me silver. I don't care where you get it. And a week later he comes back with some silver for you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point about like where you source these things, and that kind of goes into how you decide to build your item economy for the world that you have things set in. Maybe as Mike was saying, there's high magic campaigns, there's low magic campaigns of what's the availability of magic items, components, things like that. Like I know there's some games essentially say there's no buying magic items. They essentially don't exist unless you pull them out of whatever godforsaken tomb you find them in, because a regular person would never sell them. They're all carefully guarded relics. Or you could, have one where kind of more or less fair. Like I personally just have randomly generated shops that I give a brief glance over, and sometimes I've regretted things I've let go for sale because I didn't realize how powerful they were.
Yeah,
Amulet of Pure Good, regret that one a lot.
Chris's 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 NPCs shit out magic items on the daily. How do you guys feel? I mean, we're talking about item economy, downtime activities, crafting, etc. But low magic versus high magic came up, so I'm gonna ask the question because I have a pretty strong opinion on this. Low magic versus high magic.
I think it depends on the players.
Okay.
But I personally prefer high magic just because I like the feeling of players feeling like gods, both as a player and as a DM. Like I don't mind tuning things to be more difficult if my players are more powerful, because that's just more fun for everybody,
Yeah,
right?
I'm a huge fan of high magic. I tend to enjoy the Harry Potter universe a little more than the Lord of the Rings universe. Um, and that's not to say that Lord of the Rings is a great trilogy and amazing. I'm actually in the middle. I just finished Two Towers, so um, in the middle of rewatching that. But in terms of player and DM, I think high magic, like players like getting these items. They like getting cool stuff, and even if it's a hat that you can snap your fingers and this hat lets off a bunch of sparks, players are gonna find a funny way to use that. So I'm very much, when it comes to item economy and things, I'm very much high magic.
I would say I'm generally high magic. The one thing I've come to realize that I may uh, decide to like pull the lever on is I think I may limit just specifically magic weapons. I feel like so many things have like resistance to non-magical slashing, piercing, bludgeoning, but I feel like in a lot of games it's incredibly easy. Like by level 5, everyone has like a +1 magic weapon. And so many classes get abilities that turn their weapons magic and things like that that don't get to be used. So I think I may, I've always like slowly been adapting the system of masterwork, where essentially you get +1 non-magical and like +2, +3 finely crafted weapons that aren't magical. And I like the idea because it kind of like gives players that decision of like if you have a +1 magical longsword, but a +3 non-magical like mastercraft longsword. I personally I like that in games because I feel like so many things have that weakness, and to really make players think about that is a fun mechanic to use.
So what I was gonna say there was, I absolutely agree with you on this point. In that one shot you guys where you guys fought a young red shadow dragon, the resistance to piercing and blood, it didn't even come into play. All of you guys, yeah, I told you could take a rare, and you could take, I think I gave you a very rare and a rare. Um, but that resistance was just off the table because everyone had magical weapons. So I like that whole +1, +2, +3 non-magical weapon versus +1. And like you said, like there are spells like holy weapon, and there are artificer enchantments to turn weapons magical.
Yeah, or like monks become magical fists at some point. Druids can get a like. There's so many things that give it to it that I feel like having like you can have like 8 staffs of power kicking around and stuff like that. But I feel like it's fun if there's like a very limited number of just straight up magical plus something weapons.
Yeah, I actually really like that, and I'll tend to agree there. I prefer high magic, but when it comes to weapons, I can see making magical weapons rarity a good thing, and it gives a little more use, and it gives players a little better feeling when they do cast something like holy weapon, or when your artificer does enchant your fighter's +1 sword into a magical weapon, right? So yeah.
Yeah, there's so much built around like creating magical weapons, gaining the property of magical weapons that I feel like with how common they can become, I really enjoy like keeping them rare and having like other magical effects.
Like you said, there's so many creatures that were built around the idea that classes aren't going to have these magical weapons by like even like middling levels. So by having everybody have magic weapons that early, it just like completely negates the difficulty of a lot of creatures. So
Yeah.
creatures that have a CR that is reflective of like a lower magic environment, or of an environment where people don't all have magic weapons right away, um, just become kind of useless to use against them.
And also like masterwork makes a lot of sense because the idea that, the blacksmith who makes 90% like horseshoes in a small town makes a longsword the exact same as like the king's blacksmith makes another town. It's kind of ridiculous. So it kind of does make sense there would be a variance in damage of like how finely crafted a blade would be without being magical.
I like that. And when we say magical, we're talking about an actual property of the weapon. This weapon's damage counts as magical damage. That doesn't mean you can't put magic or affixes onto a weapon. Like they could find a sword that's finely crafted and has a serrated edge and applies a D4 bleed effect until someone saves. Like you can make things like that and don't count it as magical. It's just a physical property of this weapon that it's built in a way that will cause, a damage over time bleed. And that's okay. And I think it still gives you the sense of this is a really cool weapon with an interesting feature, but its damage does not count as magical for the purpose of overcoming resistances.
Yeah, you can even have like poisoned blades that do an additional die of poison damage. Doesn't mean that all of the damage is magical, but you could like hit for almost nothing with the actual slashing of a weapon, but then have the additional poison hit, right? There's lots of ways to do the mastercraft stuff without having to make an item actually magical to bypass that resistance.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite items I gave to a player was like there's a clockwork longbow where essentially it was a dwarven bow. The system, when you drew it back, would spark a flint along it and light the arrow on fire when it was fired. And it's a non-magical thing that turned your arrows into extra fire damage on hit. And that's always the idea, was that, he was stuck with this bow that was really good, but against enemies that had that resistance, he'd decide if he switched to like less damage but a magical bow.
Yeah.
Yeah, so when it comes to like, downtime activities, I think that's kind of a good run through of things they can do. Like characters can read, characters can learn skills. Your character wants to go fish, let them go fish. Let them find some fish and sell it for some gold, or bring back a meal for the party. Crafting items, acquiring items. Even things like there are certain skill books that if you spend a certain number of hours reading, you gain a +2 to your wisdom, or +2 to your charisma, or whatever, right? So those are all kind of things that can happen in downtime. So I think in terms of continuing the campaign, that's some of the more important stuff, like keeping these plot threads going, allowing characters to RP together, having these various, main quests, side quests, and these downtime activities. And that's going to make the bulk of your session. Now, what happens when a player comes to you, or in game, something unexpected happens? Like, someone comes to you and wants to craft a certain item that does not exist in the world, or they do something crazy with spells and kill your big bad evil guy in 20 sessions earlier than they're supposed to. How do you adapt to change in these continuing campaign sessions?
So I think you have to approach it from the mindset of anyone that's doing anything that depends on other players or other people doing what you think they're going to, and just always be ready to adapt to what they're doing. So
It's improv, right?
Yeah, it's improv. I just let them do what they're going to do, and then I use that going forward. So in our Strahd campaign, you guys killed Strahd super early. I did a shit ton of reading and research around all of the lore around the worlds of that, and then came up with something to continue the world after the fact because you guys wanted to keep playing, right? So it's just a matter of like being able to just adapt on the fly. So let players do what they're going to do, as long as it is within the rules that you are allowing for your world. Obviously, like if they're trying to do something that you don't think should happen, then just rule that that's not the way that goes. But yeah, if your big bad dies, don't like fudge the die or fudge the HP or make them disappear and come back, or like anything like that can feel super cheesy and like not rewarding at all for your players.
Not even just cheesy, but like cheated. Like your players can feel cheated if you do something like that as a DM.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you don't want resentment from your players towards the DM because you took away their moment, right? Like if they do something that's crazy good or that like you just didn't anticipate and it takes down your big bad because you weren't playing them properly, you didn't pay attention. That's not your player's fault, right? Like you need to adapt to that and you need to come up with a way to continue the storyline, or that's where it wraps up. Like there's nothing wrong with ending a campaign earlier than you thought you were going to because your players resolved the thing early in a way that you didn't anticipate them doing it.
Yeah, and let me go further to say you said ending a campaign, and I'm gonna change that up to ending the arc. We killed Strahd early, and you didn't anticipate that, and that was the Strahd arc. And now we're dealing with a whole bunch of other crap, right? So as a DM, like, if that's the natural conclusion to the arc, even if that's not your planned end, just go with it, right? Yeah. I was gonna throw what is it? Act, react, readapt, apt. I don't know if you've seen that Office episode, but yeah, I think being versatile as a DM is important. And very, to be cliche, very much yes and for the most part. There are going to be things your players try to do where you're like, no, 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 no.
Oh, 100%. Like, sometimes players can do shit and you're just like, no. Like, that's not a thing that can happen. But most of the time, like, DMing is 90% making shit up as you go without saying, like, you're making shit up as you go.
I find as well, like, a huge part is, like, as a DM, I feel like a good skill to have is deciding when to accept defeat really early. So essentially, you can snip what you were going to do early and hopefully salvage some of it to use later that they hadn't seen yet. Because I'll bring up one dungeon specific where Mike got his hands on some marvelous pigments, and they realized that in a very powerful item already, that they started doing some math about the fact that they could make essentially pencil-sized holes through anything, and then just fog form through every wall and anywhere.
You were not happy about this when you talked to me.
I mean, I wasn't happy about it, but I decided that, I was just going to accept the fact that they skipped through all this and just not even talk about the puzzles that were in there, and just be like, yeah, I mean, if you're going to be Swiss cheesing this place, you broke the mechanisms, it just doesn't work. And this room is just sitting here. And they found small chambers full of gears and stuff, but I had no clue what they did, because I just put that back in my DM bag. I'm like, I'll save this for when you're ready for it.
Yeah, that's fair.
And
Totally
I let them do it, but as soon as I realized there's no way for me to tell them, no, it doesn't work like that, I was just like, well, you know what? I'm just gonna pack all this in my bag and take it home with me. And yeah, you guys blow through these walls and get to the stuff, and you have that. And I think that's a really good thing. It's like, if you realize your players are going to get past something you've done, it's better to hide the fact that it existed in the first place and just save it for later.
Yeah, but
instead of trying to railroad them back into it.
Yeah, you can also then later make a ruling about you know what, that item doesn't actually work like that in this world, so from now on, nothing more than 5 feet of distance.
Yeah, because obviously that's a massive exploit that makes
absolutely it is
90% of everything ridiculous.
Yeah,
dude, even sitting at the table as a player, I was like, I don't think we can do that, guys.
And
I don't think that's how that works.
I mean, talk to your players about this, and if any of them have issues, be like, when a video game patches something, that's it. It's patched. Your Magic Pigment is now patched. Patch notes version Chris 0.0, Magic Pigment does not work like that.
No one was mad about that because they realized how powerful it was, and they realized that they wouldn't actually get to do any dungeons because they just fucking straw hole and fog form through it, and just be it's well, we got the thing. On to the next one. Man, remember when we used to play the game? Well, a lot of it too was just it was the randomness. It's when to start. They were just I'm gonna drill a hole 30 feet south and see if there's anything. And half time it'd be nothing. So it's just also a massive waste of time for everybody.
Yeah.
It's is there anything here? No. Is something here? No. It's there's only so many rooms. You guys keep digging up. I don't know. There's only a floor or two.
I think part of that adapting to changes is, if your players want to do something cool and there's no system for it, just let them know, I'm going to take this away and I'll think about it. I know in Chris's game, we established a forge and we hired a magical dwarven smith who was able to imbue magic items or magic into items or disenchant items. I basically had a way to combine magical items, and there's nothing like that in the D&D source books as far as I know, the combination of magical properties of items. But as a DM, if a player comes to you with an idea like that, that's part of adapting, is come up with a system for it.
That was honestly one of my favorite things that characters have created kind of alongside me inside a campaign, because as you know, inside my homebrew campaign, I threw a ridiculous amount of magic items, both real and homebrew, inside them. But there's only so many attunement slots, and I thought that was a really fun system to kind of like take the uh, arsenal that was collected throughout the game and kind of like have a chance by spending extra money, time, and stuff like that to kind of smash them together and maybe make something new and exciting. And some really good weapons came out of it.
Yeah, and also adds the randomness of like, if you don't know how much gold it takes and you fail, like you just lost 2 super powerful magical items. So
Yeah, I combined my ring of protection with my sword of chicken finding, and that Mike's mentioned on the podcast before. That is what led to my +2 sword, or +1 or +2, I don't remember, sword of chicken protection. So
Yep.
I could detect chickens, and my sword would damage me to heal other people. So there's and I mean, you can really get some cool flavored items. Like, you have a bow that shoots, your one arrow splits into 3, but it also grants you advantage on stealth checks because it envelops you in smoke. Like,
Aw, what's
that's yeah.
what's Matt's harpoon of the dreadnought? That was a cool one.
Yeah, it was a normal harpoon, and then also it was a javelin that did necrotic damage, and you
That was
combined
it.
the harpoon in that to be a harpoon that does a ton of necrotic damage and
And
also pulls you back 30 feet.
yeah, it had a pull effect, right? Yeah, that was
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, harpoons have the pull effect, and then the javelin had a shit ton of necrotic damage. You just combined the two.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Advantage to hit stuff in water?
Oh yeah,
No, that was the hat, wasn't it?
no. I think the harpoon actually did have that effect. Is if your
Yeah.
target was in water, you had advantage.
Yeah.
Because meant to be like a fish
Right.
fighter.
I think that's a lot of the fun of, I think, the adapting and the improv, and like the whole yes and. I think that's where, at least for me, a lot of the fun in DMing comes in. Is just listening to what players want to do, because they come up with some funky stuff, man.
Oh, players come up with the wildest shit, like just stuff you would never think they'd come up with, which is why it's so much fun to DM.
What else do we want to cover?
Cool.
I think that's a pretty good,
I think that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a pretty good episode on continuing your campaign and kind of getting people back into it. And your subsequent sessions are very much what we've been talking about, right? Like, start with a recap, have those plot threads continue through, and continue to work towards, building excitement, building tension, and working towards not only your goals as a DM for the campaign. Maybe your goal as a DM is to get them to the BBEG and have this epic moment, but also like your players' goals.
Yeah, for sure. It's always fun to work player goals and player backstories into the main threads. I'm Mike, and if you ever need to slide into a DMs, you can DM us on Insta, Twitter, Facebook at DMs Discuss, or hit us up via email at dmsdiscuss@gmail.com.
I'm Chris, and summon an imp with 120 feet of dark vision to keep an eye on your favorite podcatcher to find our new episodes.
And I'm Scott. Hope you all enjoyed this episode. And as always, check the show notes for links and other fun stuff. We'll catch you after a long rest.